Hello and welcome to this new educational chess game. I have white and I'm going to start with the move e4. My opponent is playing very quickly. g6, I'm going to play the pawn to d4. Bishop to g7 is also played very quickly. And c4, my opponent plays d6 to hold back the e5 push. So in this position, I've established a strong pawn center, but my opponent has created a structure with a bishop. On the longest dark squared diagonal, a bishop that's called a fianchetto. And generally, black continues with knight to f6 and kingside castling. I'm going to play knight to c3 in this position. My opponent plays knight to c6 with this double attack on the pawn. And look at what he wants to do. If I play knight to f3, he'll definitely play bishop to g4 to pin my knight and renew the threats against the d4 pawn. So instead, I'll play bishop to e3 to defend the d4 pawn. My opponent plays e5. He's fighting for the d4 square. If I push d5, he could come into d4. Because if I capture, pawn recaptures and the bishop protects the pawn. If I play knight to f3, he'll play bishop to g4 again. So here I'm thinking about knight to e2. Let's play knight to e2 to properly defend d4. Now that does block my bishop, that's for sure. My opponent plays knight to e7. Now I could push d5 without him being able to come to d4. I would win a pawn. And his knight is short on squares. He would almost be forced to go back to b8. I'm going to play this d5 push. There we go, the knight goes back to b8. And now my opponent is aiming for the f5 push. When you have a closed center, you need to identify the leading pawn. My pawn is on d5, so I need to look for play on c5. Put the pawn next to it. And my opponent has a pawn on e5, so he'll be looking to advance with f5. Also put the pawn next to it. So he lost the tempo by retreating his knight to b8. On the other hand, I also have a problem with my knight on e2. My knight could be well placed on d3, with, for example, nc1, then nd3 to support the c5 push. But that might take a bit too long. On g3, it won't be very good because after the f5 push, there will be this threat. f4. So let's still look at knight c1. He pushes f5, or maybe he does kingside castling first. For example, bishop e2, f5. And I can play f3. On f4, we can retreat to f2, and the knight will come back to life on d3. Let's play like this, knight c1. It loses a bit of time, but he has lost some as well. My opponent plays a 6 here. I don't know why. What was he afraid of? I'm going to quietly play bishop e2 for now. He castles kingside. And now I'm hesitating between knight to d3 and kingside castling myself. He's going to play against me. f5, that's for sure. And after f5, I'll have to play f3. Well, I think I have time to play. Knight d3. To prepare the c5 push, you see the two strategies, the center is blocked. d6 against d5, e5 against e4. So you have to find the levers on the sides. And you identify the advanced pawn and create play with the advanced pawn duo. And it's the same for him. So he just played knight to d7. Actually, I could already play c5. But c5 can't be counted. Even if he plays b6, I'll have the move b4. And even b6 will be a weakening of his position since it will create a weakness on the c6 square. So I'm not going to rush. I'll do kingside castling. If he plays f5, always f3. There you go. f5, f3, and on f4, bishop to f2. And now he's going to launch the attack with g5, h5, g4. I'll have to be very aggressive on the other side. I don't know what moves like g4 would do either to try to block his advance. If he captures en passant, I can recapture with the pawn. He might try to play g4 to break up my structure a bit. But well, pawn takes. The dark squared bishop can become active again, for example on h6 still. Let's play c5. My opponent plays knight f6. Now he's going to support g4. He has the knight, the bishop, and soon the pawn on h5. So if I take d6 and he recaptures with the pawn, maybe knight a4 with the threat of entering b6. Now that the king on d7 is no longer there to watch and the bishop that could support. So I take on d6 and knight a4 threatens to enter on b6. You can see the weakness of the b6 square. In response to these kingside threats, Jodo has created counterplay on the queenside. Obviously, attacks on the kingside are more dangerous, so I need to be faster and more effective on the queenside. Now he's thinking, how to deal with the b6 square? Maybe bring the knight back to d7 to defend the b6 square, but actually that's not part of his plan. Because knight to f6 plus freeing up f8 can support the g4 push. But if he goes back to d7, the g4 push can't happen. And he needs to look for the h5 push, then g4, and take more and more space. Sometimes there are even rooks, f7, bishop f8, rook g7, so that the rook is facing my king and supports after the g3 push. So this is the first moment where he's really thinking in this position. So what are my objectives? The b6 square, the pressure on d6, even if for now it's not possible. That's a weak pawn, and I'll need to try to target it. Then, of course, getting onto the c file with moves like rooks to c1, queen to c2, and entering on c7. Try to provoke the exchange of queens, because without the queens on the board, his kingside attack won't work. And then we'll only be talking about weaknesses on the queenside. So he plays g4. So we enter on b6. Here he can't play rook a7. He'll be under the bishop's sights, so he'll play rook to b8. He takes on f3, attacking my white square bishop. So if I were to take his rook on a8, he would then take my valuable white square bishop. I recapture, and I will have won the exchange sacrifice. But is the exchange sacrifice really that valuable in this position? Plus, after knight takes rook, pawn takes, queen takes, he'll play bishop g4, he will attack my queen and he will attack my knight. So in the end, I'm going to lose material. So I have to recapture on f3. I'm going to recapture with the pawn, actually, I think. It's true that it leaves him the h3 square. But I wanted to recapture with the pawn to solidify e4 and allow king h1 and rook g1 after. Maybe after the capture on f3, he plays bishop h3. I take his rook. If he takes my rook, I take back his bishop. He can take my knight, but he won't have his white square bishop anymore. And his dark square bishop doesn't play very well. It's his white square bishop that provides the complementarity. Well, of course, I could also recapture with the bishop on f3. But I'm going to recapture with the pawn. Hide my king on the h-file, put the rook on g1. It's certain that he's going to play bishop h3. I take his rook, I think he'll take mine, but after I recapture the bishop in the end, my two bishops will secure my castling well by controlling the squares effectively. In fact, he's even hesitating to take my rook, as you can see here. He might want to keep his bishop to create threats on g2. If his queen managed to get to g2. But anyway, after that, I play king, h1, rook g1, if he doesn't take my rook. And maybe even bishop f1 after to exchange his bishop. This is the second moment in the game where he thinks. The first moment was when he entered on b6. And now it's about deciding whether he'll take the knight or the rook. There he took the knight. He doesn't want to take the rook. And I'm going to play king h. I'm going to leave him the rook. If he doesn't take it, I'll play rook g1. I'll save it. But I think it's useful for me to keep my white square bishop, and especially for him to part with his. Because his dark square bishop is having a lot of trouble playing. It's his white square bishop that provides complementarity in controlling the colors with the pawn structure on dark squares and also brings the danger. So I'm lacking space on the king side, but if I can play rook g1, it'll be fine. He might play king h8, rook g8 as well. And then I need to bring the fight to the queen side with the rooks. c1, maybe queen c2, some entries on c7 to attack d6 to attack b7. My knight isn't very well placed. I need to reposition it as well. You see, he puts the queen on e8. We're going to play rook g1. We're going to control the g file now. He didn't want to take the exchange, so he'll stay a quality down. Granted, he still has his bishop, white square. He moves his king over to contest the file. Here I can consider bishop to f1 to offer a bishop's exchange. If he plays queen to h5, then I won't be able to play bishop takes, queen takes, and offer the exchange of queens because he'll take on f3 with check. But what threat does he have here? I don't see it. I don't see his threats, but my knight isn't doing anything. Maybe it should get to the f2 square to push back his bishop. Where is my bishop going to go? Bishop to b6 maybe. To threaten bishop to c7 afterwards, put pressure on the whole pawn structure by attacking the base, and give the f2 square to my knight. That could be interesting. Otherwise, of course, I have moves like queen to b3 right away to attack b7. If I play bishop to b6, maybe he'll play knight to d7 to attack my bishop. And also let the rook through. Because after bishop to c7, I attack his pawn, but he plays rook to f6, he defends and brings the rook to the 6th rank. At that point, I don't know. Or else, rook c1. That threatens rook c7. All right, I'm going to play rook c1 in this position. The rook wasn't doing anything anyway, so let's try to place it on the open file. I don't have much time left, but it's a game where there's a 5-second increment per move for both him and me. This entry on c7 could be interesting. Besides the fact that it attacks the b7 pawn, it puts pressure on the knight, preventing the queen from going wherever she wants. And if the knight moves, it puts pressure on the bishop. So I have an extra rook. I'm trying to make use of it. He, on the other hand, has an extra knight. But his knights are lacking squares. Maybe I need to be careful sometimes about a knight sacrifice on my pawn structure. But I don't feel like it's very dangerous here. On the other hand, my rook on the 3rd rank isn't playing. There's always this need for me to be able to play knight to f2 at some point. But I want to keep my dark squared bishop. Because my pawn structure is on the light squares, so I want to keep my dark square bishop. Because his structure is also on the dark squares here. The structure is fixed, the pawns are blocked. Because the pawns on b7 and a6 aren't blocked yet. And so it's this dark square bishop that can attack that pawn chain from behind. Maybe it would have been better to play bishop b6, but knight d7, bishop c7, rook f6. That bothered me. And my bishop may have had trouble getting back in afterwards. Well, with rook c1, I can also keep some ideas. Bishop b6, we'll see. For now, he's thinking a lot, so I'm thinking a lot too, a lot beforehand. He's a player rated over 2,100, so it's normal that he takes his time. Players who are a bit less experienced or a bit lower rated generally tend to play too quickly. Especially when I don't have much time left and they're trying to play fast to make me lose on time. But by playing quickly, they themselves risk making blunders, simply put, big mistakes. So he should rather take his time to find the strongest moves. He plays b5. And so now I'm interested in rook to c7. My knight wasn't doing anything. Now I'm also considering knight to b6. That attacks a 6, and if a 5, I can go into c6. And if he takes, I recapture with the rook, attack d6, and the bishop will attack b5. But my knight, I actually wanted it to come to f2. After this move into c6, I'm not sure if it's really that good. All right, I'll play rook. c7, I don't have much time. We'll see later about my knight or my bishop. He plays queen e8, his knight is cloué. That's good news. So now I'm going to play knight b4 for knight c6 and attack his pinned knight. Plus I'm attacking the a6 pawn. If a 6 moves, the b5 pawn will also become weak. And if I win the pawns on the queen side, I'll have passed pawns. I just need to hold on the king side, not get checkmated. But for now, there's no reason to worry. He sacrifices on e4. He sacrifices on e4. What did he see? I didn't see it. He's going to push f3 afterwards, but I don't feel like it's that dangerous. I can play bishop f1. Or maybe even take. He pushes f3, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. I've traded. Queen, rook takes, knight. He takes my bishop, but then I take his because I have both rooks converging on the bishop. g7. And on f3, I can also consider rook. Takes knight, he takes my bishop, I take his queen. If he takes my queen, I take his rook with check. And on f3, rook takes knight. If he takes, I take back. But I've given back the exchange, though. I think I need to keep the rook on this 7th rank. So on f3, I think I'll actually play bishop takes. So I'm going to play bishop to f3 to stabilize the pawn so it can't advance anymore. I have an extra piece, but my knight isn't in the center of the action. Even if he takes the pawn on a 6, the real action is more about going after the king. So he comes to g6, but his knight won't be able to move, otherwise he'll lose g7. I still don't have much time. I could go take on a6, but I feel like I'm moving my knight away from the action. Well, I still don't have much time, so I'll take on i6. My knight, that pawn on a6, wasn't very interesting, actually. He plays rook to g8 to defend his bishop, actually. I'll play rook b7 to attack b5. More importantly, I'll go rook b8, supported by the knight, to exchange rooks, try to calm him down a bit. He can bring his bishop back to c8, but I have rook b6 to protect. He plays bishop h6, and so I'm going to play rook b8. I'm going to propose the exchange of rooks. Normally, he would put a piece on f8 to prevent me from exchanging the rooks, but he plays bishop g5, so I exchange the rooks right away. Now he's going to want to play bishop h4, I think. And I try to come back with my knight, try to come to e6. I'm not afraid if he takes, even if he wins a pawn, it's not very important. He's down a piece. I've already won pawns on the other side as well. All right, let's try to get back into the game. We're attacking his dark square bishop. He's going to come to h4 to attack my bishop here. I'm going to play queen e2 to defend everything. There we go. He might play knight h4 against me. Knight h4, but I don't see what comes next. He plays knight h4. There it is. Do I have a move? I really don't have much time left. I didn't see the move, so I'll play a3 to play b3 and a4 and create a passed pawn on the other side. I'm still very cautious about what could happen. Maybe knight g5, that could be interesting. So he takes, I take back. I don't see what comes next either. I'm attacking his bishop now. He takes, so I take back. And now I offer a queen's exchange while threatening mate. And there you go, he resigns. So the computer gives me 95% accuracy versus 89% for my opponent. But let's take a look anyway, because beyond the very high accuracy score, I think there were some critical moments that I handled poorly and that could have given him a lot of play. And it could have been very dangerous for me. Let's take a look. So the opening, e4, g6, d4, bg7, c4, d6, nc3, nc6. Bishop to e3, the push to e5, and here it is. This is a critical moment. I've already been caught out here before with this attack on the d4 pawn. If you push immediately to d5, he comes into d4. And you can't really try to eliminate the knight and win the pawn, because if you play bishop takes, pawn takes, and for example, knight b5 or knight e2, there will be c5 anyway, which consolidates. And in case of en passant pawn takes, of course, we eliminate the pawn, but it cost us a lot to eliminate this pawn. It cost us our dark squared bishop. But his dark squared bishop is now shining along the diagonal ever since the e5 pawn captured on d4. And it's going to hurt us a lot. He's going to play against us with it. Queen to f5, he's going to hurt us a lot on the dark diagonals, you see. And I can't even play queen to d2 because he'll trade queens, then he'll take the knight. That means in this position, we'll have to play king to e2 and be left without castling. And black finds compensation for the sacrifice pawn, of course. I've already lost games on this theme, where I played d5 and the knight came into d4. And I've also been in trouble on knight f3 in other games because of bishop g4 that comes to pin me. And it's the same, as soon as there is d5, it goes into d4. And after bishop e2, he can take the knight and then take on d4 with the knight, the pawn, the bishop. So that's why I'm very cautious in this position and played knight e2. But that's experience talking because I've lost games on this theme. So here I play cavalier e2 because after bishop g4, of course, I can play f3 and break the pin. He plays knight e7. Now I push d5 because I have triple control over the d4 square. And so after knight d4, knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes. And after bishop takes, queen recaptures. And here I would win the pawn under good conditions. So that's why he goes to b8. It makes him lose a tempo. And here I'm also going to lose a tempo with my knight by playing knight c1 to reposition it on d3. This idea isn't bad, but I don't know why I was focused on kingside castling with my king. I could have played queen d2 and prepared queenside castling. That would have been simpler. But in the position, I played knight c1. So he played a 6, I played bishop e2, he did kingside castling, I repositioned the knight to d3 so it could support the c5 push. He played knight d7, I did kingside castling, he sends f5, that's normal, I don't want to get caught. 4, so I play f3 to give my bishop a retreat square. f4 comes, the bishop retreats to f2 and he pushes g5. That's completely natural. My advanced pawn was on e5, so that was my lever for progress. It goes through c5, and for him, his advanced pawn is on f4, so that's his lever for progress. It goes through g4, which he needs to support with the h-pawn, the knight on f6, and the bishop on c8. So I play c5 immediately. He plays knight to f6, each of us creating our own advances on our respective sides. I take on d6, and then I hurried to play knight to a4, feeling very pleased with this move to get into b6. And in reality, the computer tells me that knight to a4 is a mistake. Actually, or rather an inaccuracy, you can see that the evaluation bar on the right has dropped compared to before. So knight to a4 was not the move to play. Here, the move to play was king to g1. It's very complicated to understand, of course. I'll explain it to you. After knight to a4, he can play g4, which is what he actually played, and I can't take on g4 because I would lose the pawn on e4. So you might say, it's not a big deal. I played knight to b6. But here, instead of taking on f3, he had an excellent move, g3. And that would have put me in trouble. If I take his rook, he takes my bishop with check. And my knight won't be able to get out after bishop to d7. If I take his pawn on g3, he recaptures. It's always the same. If I take on g3 here, he'll take my knight on b6 with check. If I play bishop to e3, the danger is having left him the pawn on g3, which is a very dangerous pawn for my king. For example, he'll play knight to h5, then knight to g6 to bring the queen to h4 and threaten mate on h2. So he wouldn't care at all about losing the rook because he's going to play for checkmate, actually. So his best continuation would have been to play g3 here. And that's why in this position, you shouldn't play knight a4 right away. You should first play king h1. If he plays g4, I can take because the presence of the knight on c3 allows me to defend e4. And I still keep the protection of the g4 pawn. And so he can't play g4 immediately because he would lose his g4 pawn. The knight on c3 protects the pawn on e4, so he could play knight g6. And now having played king h1 frees up the g1 square for my bishop. That means the pawn pushes won't come with an attack. My bishop. So even if he plays h5, now I can play knight a4 to look for the b6 square. And on g4, I can come into b6 here, attacking his rook and his light-squared bishop. Of course, these subtleties are complicated, but in any case, king h1. It's interesting because he wants to open the g-file with the advance of the g4 pawn, so it's a good idea to put your king on h1 and give the g1 square to the bishop to fight against the advance of the pawn all the way to g3. The bishop must always be able to control the b6 square so that the knight can come into b6, take the rook, and then get out of the position again. That's why king h1 followed by bishop g1 was preferable to knight f4, which was too premature. I played knight f4, he pushes g4, I come into b6, and then he doesn't play g3. So that was his missed chance in the game. He takes on f3. So I recapture with the pawn. That's the best way to take back. Sure, the bishop comes to h3, I take his rook, and now you can see the evaluation, the analysis bar, it's in my favor. Whether he takes my rook or not, it's favorable for me. So he took the knight, I played king h1. His bishop is dangerous. It's really the only piece that's dangerous. So I let him take my rook. He doesn't want to take the rook. He plays queen e8 to bring his queen back. But now, rook g1. He plays rh8 to give the square, g8, but rook c1. And finally now, the game becomes pretty easy. I have a very favorable evaluation, almost 3 points ahead. So there's not much point in looking any further. We can still look at b5. The rook comes to c7. He plays queen f7. I play king b4. And here he sacrifices on e4. You have to understand that now the game is lost for him. I'm up the exchange. He has no attack on my king. The dark-squared bishop is very bad. It would be hard for him to play. His pawns on the queen side are about to fall. The a6 pawn, the b5 pawn, my rook on c7 is very annoying. So he's going to start playing all out with knight e4, but it just doesn't work. Pawn takes, and there he played. Queen to f6, but we were looking at the push to f3. On the push to f3, I would have sacrificed. I would have played bishop takes. Queen takes to exchange queens, and then take his knight. Sure, he takes the bishop, but I can take his with my rook. For example, to threaten mate, but even the other rook is possible. Threatening rook takes h7 with the gain of the bishop, and if he plays rook check, I come back to defense, and he can't come back to f2, otherwise there will be rook e8, which will cause the mate. He must bring the rook back, and I take it, and it's mate. Well, there you go. I hope this game was instructive against the defense. Indian defense, that's the defense my opponent used. And we'll see each other soon for new videos, but don't forget to leave likes, comments, share the video, and support the channel. Goodbye, everyone.